We all agreed. You're not needed for the architect honors event, my boss said with a smile. Good to know, I replied, moved the $12,000 travel fund back into my account, and canceled the Vienna trip I planned for my mentor. By morning, 17 missed calls and one message from my coworker that changed everything. Event terminated. I'll never forget the look on Harold's face the last time I saw him speak at a lecture hall. Quiet dignity, sharp mind, but something in his posture had begun to sag. Like he knew people saw him more as a relic than a mentor. That's when I knew I had to do something. My name is Ethan Price. I'm 33 years old, an architect in Chicago. And if you ask anyone who got me into this field, I'll tell you without hesitation, it was Harold Vexler. Not with loud speeches or grand gestures, but with quiet comments in the margins of my designs, small nudges that rewired how I saw the built world. That's why I decided to honor him. Not with a dinner party or a plaque on some office wall. No, I wanted something worthy. A full week in Vienna, a place Harold once called the lungs of European architecture, attending an elite symposium. I called it professional development when I pitched it, and technically it was, but really, it was a tribute. I paid for it from a fund I'd created years ago, a personal thing I tucked away for moments like this. The real work started 6 months before his 65th birthday, coordinating the flights, the hotel, the guest list. I even started reaching out to Harold's old students, some in Europe, some in New York, asking if they had any of his old sketches. Not the ones he published. The forgotten ones, drawn on cafe napkins or yellowing pads. I wanted to build a showcase, a private gallery just for him. Something no one else would have done. Miranda, my boss at the firm, was the first person I told. At first, she smiled wide, said, "That's incredibly thoughtful, Ethan." But there was a pause behind her eyes. She didn't ask many questions, just nodded and told me to keep her updated. I should have known that wasn't a good sign. I remember feeling almost guilty for how much it meant to me. Like I was doing too much, caring too hard. But every time I had doubts, I'd open one of those old design reviews Harold left on my college projects. Push the column line, price, or look at light like it's trying to escape the structure. His handwriting was still crisp, still smarter than mine. And when I finally confirmed the venue in Vienna, I felt like I'd pulled off a miracle. A restored brutalist exhibition hall near Karlsplatz. The perfect place for a man who taught us that even concrete had soul. I told Harold's daughter about the trip first, just to make sure he'd be available. She got quiet on the phone, then said, "He'll never ask for anything, but I know this would mean the world." The next day I booked everything. Flights, accommodations, even tickets to a Strauss concert. I figured, why not? That Friday, I told Harold. He looked up from his coffee, confused. "Vienna," he said, blinking behind his glasses. "For you," I said. "A symposium. A tribute, and maybe a bit of a vacation." He just stared at me, then let out a slow, soft chuckle. "You always were too generous, Ethan." That was the first time I saw moisture in his eyes. Back at the firm, Miranda had become more interested. She started asking how much I was spending, who I was inviting, whether the firm should put out a press release. I brushed it off. She was the partner. I figured she just wanted to stay in the loop. Then came the first sign of trouble. "We should consider hosting it in-house," she said one morning, walking past my desk like she was talking about moving a meeting. Would be more cost-effective and better exposure for the firm. I laughed, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. Still, I didn't push back. Not yet. I was too focused on the sketches coming in. Former students sent me scanned blueprints from '89, sketches from an unbuilt bridge in Oslo, charcoal studies of spatial voids Harold used to obsess over. I stayed up late organizing them, framing some, digitizing others. I wanted to surprise him with a physical legacy. Something to show he still mattered. Dean, one of my colleagues, and someone who rarely had a thought that wasn't Miranda's, stopped by my desk and said, "You know, Miranda mentioned a live stream might be better for firm engagement. Keep it scalable." He said it like he was offering helpful advice. I smiled and nodded, but something inside me started to nod. This was supposed to be a tribute, not a campaign. Still, I stayed quiet. After all, everything was booked. Everything was in motion. I come too far to start second-guessing myself now. At least, that's what I told myself. Because deep down, I already knew. Something was shifting. 2 weeks after Harold confirmed he'd go to Vienna, things started to unravel. It wasn't dramatic. Not at first. It was like erosion. Small changes, slow pressure, nothing you could point to until the cracks were too wide to ignore. Miranda started dropping by my desk more often. Not to ask questions, but to offer direction. "Vienna sounds beautiful," she said one morning, placing her coffee on my draft set like it belonged there. "But we need to think bigger. More strategic. What if we hosted something local? The firm's got a great atrium, better optics, easier media access." I blinked at her. "But this isn't a firm event. It's for Harold." Her smile was too smooth. "Exactly. And Harold is a beloved figure in our community. Why not let the whole city celebrate him? The logic sounded harmless, even flattering. But the idea behind it felt off. This wasn't meant to be a PR campaign. It was a tribute, intimate and specific. Harold didn't need a crowd. He needed to be seen by the people who mattered. Still, I nodded. I'll think about it. That was my mistake. A few days later, Dean cornered me at lunch. Tray in hand, half a sandwich dangling from his mouth. Miranda's thinking a panel discussion with Harold. We could loop in the university. Stream it. Maybe get one of the local papers to sponsor. I stared at him. Panel discussion? He nodded like I was slow to catch on. Yeah, you know, spotlight is legacy, get quotes, maybe archive it for interns. Great exposure. I didn't say anything. Just watched him bite into his sandwich like he'd just invented the idea of honoring someone. Later that day, Miranda asked if I'd be willing to hand over the logistics so her team could streamline the process. Her words, not mine. I hesitated. Everything's already booked. The venue, the travel. She waved a hand. We'll reimburse the fund. And of course, you'll still be involved. But this has grown. We need professionals handling it. I nodded again. Another mistake. That night, I called Harold's daughter. I needed grounding. Just a quiet voice to remind me this wasn't insane. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, Ethan, don't let her twist this into another PR stunt. That hit me harder than I expected. Harold doesn't need applause, she added. He needs sincerity. Something real. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the framed blueprint of a cathedral Harold once reviewed in class. I could still hear his voice in my head. You design from the inside out. Start with purpose, then wrap it in walls. Somewhere along the line, I had stopped designing this moment. Now I was just trying to hold on to it. The next morning, Dean had drafted a new schedule. He handed it to me like a dry cleaning receipt. Just a rough plan, he said. Media walkthrough. Partner acknowledgements. Press Q&A. We'll probably cut the Vienna part. Miranda says it's impractical. Impractical. I looked down at the paper. My name wasn't anywhere on it. That night, I found the ticket confirmation to Vienna and read through every line. The symposium still had my name on the registration. Harold's flight still showed guest of Ethan Price. But somehow, I felt like a ghost in my own plan. I'd built something delicate and real. But Miranda was sanding it down, polishing it into something slick and hollow. And Dean? He was happy to help. That's what he did. Followed power, echoed it, made it feel reasonable. I wanted to fight. But I also remembered how Miranda had once saved my job in year 2. How she'd vouched for me when I missed a deadline because my dad had a stroke. That loyalty still lived somewhere inside me, buried under the weight of resentment. But now it was a question of whose vision mattered more. The mentor I admired, or the machine I worked for. It happened faster than I expected. I walked into the office one Monday morning and felt it in the air, like a room that had just been vacuumed of oxygen. No one looked at me directly. Dean gave a half nod from his cubicle but didn't say anything. Miranda's door was shut, blinds drawn. That wasn't normal. Then I saw the email. Subject, Harold Vexler Celebration, Planning Committee Sync-Up. I wasn't on it. My stomach dropped. I scrolled through the list, Dean, 2 senior associates, a marketing coordinator, and Miranda as chair. That word, chair, was the knife. I wasn't even listed as a consultant. I stood up, walked to her office, and knocked once. She didn't look surprised when I entered. Her smile was tight, her voice calm. Ethan, just in time. We formed a planning group. We'll handle things from here. You cancel Vienna. It wasn't a question. I'd already seen the refund notice in my inbox. The symposium ticket. The hotel. All reversed. Miranda nodded, like she was confirming a lunch order. It didn't make strategic sense. I tried to breathe slowly. What about the sketch exhibit? She picked up a sleek binder and slid it across her desk. We're going with a VR installation instead. Sponsored by Hallmark Partners. It'll be interactive, very modern. I stared at it. On the cover was a mock-up of Harold's face floating beside shimmering CGI models of generic buildings. The kind of digital gloss that looked expensive but said nothing. I spent months gathering those sketches, I said. Some of them were from his first students. They're irreplaceable. I understand, Miranda said softly. But this direction gives us more reach. More engagement. It's what Harold deserves. I swallowed the anger rising in my throat. You mean it's what the firm wants? She leaned back. Ethan, you're overreacting. This is still your idea. But it's bigger than you now. You should be proud. It felt like gaslighting in real time. Like watching someone steal your house and tell you it was for your own safety. When I walked out of her office, I knew 2 things. 1, the Vienna trip was dead. 2, I wasn't part of this anymore. That afternoon, Dean gave a presentation on evolving the tribute at our weekly staff meeting. He used slides I had made. Even quoted one of Harold's old lectures I had handwritten in my journal, which I'd shared weeks ago during a brainstorming call. No mention of me. Afterward, I stood by the coffee machine, waiting to cool down. A junior designer I barely knew approached, sipping tea. Didn't realize you were on this project too, she said. I forced a smile. I started it. She blinked. Oh. Huh. I thought Dean came up with it. That moment did something to me. Like watching a photo of yourself get printed with someone else's face. Later, I overheard a conversation near the elevator. Two architects from upstairs. Ethan's been kind of weird lately. I heard he's upset about the direction change. Well, he was just doing it for personal reasons, right? It's a firm project now. That was the line. A firm project now. Not mine. Not Harold's. Just another marketing opportunity wrapped in sentimental packaging. I sat at my desk, opened a folder labeled Vexler Sketch Archive, and stared at the hundreds of files I'd scanned myself. Renderings, drafts, annotations in red ink. They looked back at me like ghosts from a better plan. I wanted to send them to Harold anyway. Just box them up and mail them to his house. But part of me wondered if even he would understand. That night, I didn't stay late. I packed my bag and left at 5 on the dot. No one noticed. No one asked where I was going. I walked through the lobby, past the new posters Dean had designed, Harold's silhouette under bold Helvetica that read Tribute 65, A Journey of Innovation. And I thought to myself, I'm not just being erased. I'm being replaced. And no one's even hiding it. I waited a full week before calling Harold. Not because I didn't want to, but because I needed time to figure out what I'd even say. Hey, remember that once-in-a-lifetime tribute I built for you? Yeah, they killed it and replaced it with a VR slideshow. I couldn't bring myself to say it. But when I finally did call, it didn't go how I hoped. Miranda means well, Harold said, his voice placid over the phone. She's a powerhouse. Knows how to get things done. I stood in my apartment, staring at the Vienna itinerary still pinned to my fridge. I waited for him to say more. To ask me why I sounded tired. To notice the weight in my silence. He didn't. That night, I tossed the itinerary in the trash. 2 days later, Miranda came to my desk with a new request. We need you to transfer the balance from your development fund, she said, her tone overly casual. The budget's tight, and this really should be a team endeavor now. I stared at her like she'd grown a second head. That fund is personal. It's in my name. Right, she said quickly. But it was meant for professional development. Yes? This qualifies. We'll even credit you in the press release. Press release? I said flatly. She smiled. It'll be good exposure for you. I didn't answer her. I just turned to my screen, opened my banking app, and transferred a small stipend, $200, directly to Harold's account. A handwritten note followed by mail. Use this however you want. This part is still yours. I never got a reply. A few days after that, Dean walked by and dropped a clipboard on my desk. You're on logistics, he said, too cheery. Parking, shuttles, signage. All you, man. I blinked. Parking. Dean shrugged. It's important. We need someone we can trust managing the flow. Miranda thought of you right away. I felt the heat rise to my ears. Not because of the task, but because of what it meant. The message couldn't have been clearer. They'd cut me out of the tribute. But they still wanted me to park the cars. I didn't answer. Just pushed the clipboard back toward him without a word. He looked confused for a second, then walked away. That night, I stayed late. Everyone else had gone home. I sat alone in the break room, staring at the faded mock-up of the Vienna flyer I'd printed months ago, the one that still had my name on it. And I realized something cold and sharp. This wasn't sabotage. It was something worse. It was indifference. They weren't trying to ruin me. They just didn't care what this had meant to me in the first place. They'd taken my gesture and carved it into something else, something flashier, louder, emptier. And Harold? Even he had looked the other way. He didn't fight for me. Didn't ask why the location changed or why I'd disappeared from the plans. Maybe he was tired. Maybe he thought it wasn't worth the conflict. But for me, that was the final cut. The next morning, I showed up to work on time. Sat through the weekly sync where Dean presented the finalized tribute schedule, now featuring sponsors, media slots, and a cocktail hour with branded napkins. When Miranda asked if I was ready for parking coordination, I didn't say a word. I just stood up, grabbed my bag, and walked out of the room. No one followed. No one stopped me. And I didn't look back. I didn't quit. Not officially. Not yet. But I pulled the plug on Vienna. $12,000, my savings, my vision, my sacrifice, gone from the development fund with a few taps on my phone. Not to Miranda. Not to the firm. Gone as in. Refunded, reversed, canceled. The airline tickets? Gone. Hotel block? Canceled. Symposium entry? Withdrawn with a quiet email and a tight throat. It was like watching my own heart come undone in receipts. Miranda found out before noon. I knew she would. Her assistant was copied on the hotel confirmation and probably noticed the reservation had disappeared. At 12:37 p.m., she barged into the break room. Are you out of your mind? She hissed, her eyes wild. You canceled everything? I didn't look up from my coffee. Yeah. She stared at me, searching for the real answer, like there had to be more. Why would you sabotage the entire event? You already did that, I said, calmly. I'm just cleaning up after you. You think this is noble? She snapped. You think you're some tragic architect sacrificing for art? No. You're petty. And now you've made the firm look disorganized. Unprofessional. You made it a firm event, I said. I made it a tribute. Dean appeared in the doorway like he'd been waiting his turn. Miranda's right, he said. You blindsided everyone. Do you have any idea how much effort went into the new plan? I turned to him, fully now. Yeah, Dean. It was my plan. He didn't have a comeback. Just stood there with his mouth slightly open, like someone had paused the script. But the worst part? Harold said nothing. Not that day. Not the next. Not even after the event was scaled back into an on-site celebration with VR renderings and tech sponsors plastered on every poster. He didn't call to ask why the trip had been canceled. Didn't thank me for the stipend. Didn't show up at my desk, lean in close, and say, I know this wasn't your doing. Just silence. That afternoon, I walked out of the building and stood on the curb outside the firm. It was cloudy. Cold. Chicago kind of gray. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just stood there, watching traffic roll by like I was outside my own life. When I got home, I didn't eat. I didn't check my email. I didn't answer the calls. Instead, I went to the closet, pulled out the old box where I kept Harold's notes, his red ink critiques, his quiet encouragements, all those paper breadcrumbs he left behind over the years. I sat on the floor with them spread around me like a fallen chapel. Some of them still had coffee stains. Most had creases from my undergrad backpack. But they were real, honest, unedited. And that night, I reread every one of them. All of it. Every single note. Not because I wanted to remember who Harold was, but because I needed to remember who I was. Who I had been before the firm, before Miranda, before Dean, before tribute became product. When the words push the column line actually meant something. And that night, I didn't set an alarm for the next morning. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't sure if I'd ever go back. The morning after I canceled Vienna, my phone stayed silent. Miranda, Dean, even Harold, they all went quiet. Not a single email, not a single message. It was the kind of silence that felt calculated, like they were all waiting to see if I'd crawl back, tail between my legs, begging to be reabsorbed into the plan I'd been erased from. But late that night, I got a text. Dean, can we talk? Not at the office. That got my attention. Dean never broke from Miranda. He never did anything without checking the wind first. If he was texting me directly, something was off. We met the next morning at a coffee shop near the river, halfway between the office and nowhere. He looked like he hadn't slept. Hair messy. Wrinkled shirt. No smugness. Just tension. I found something, he said without even sitting down. In Miranda's office. I blinked. What do you mean? He slid into the booth across from me, lowered his voice. She left early yesterday. Real frantic. I had to grab her tablet from her desk to update the sponsor list. Drawer was open. Top one. Locked usually. But it was open. What was inside? I asked, not sure I wanted to know. Dean exhaled. Performance reviews. Drafts. Ones that haven't been submitted yet. About you. I stared at him. Ethan, they're bad. Like, really bad. She's been documenting things. Twisting meetings, creating a paper trail to make it look like you've been unstable for months. Late to deadlines, combative, emotionally reactive. She's building a case. He nodded grimly. To push you out. Maybe quietly, maybe with cause. Either way, she wants you gone. I felt my chest tighten, but he wasn't finished. There was more, he said. Way in the back of the drawer. An envelope. Still sealed. Had your name on it. He reached into his coat and pulled it out. My hands shook slightly as I opened it. A single-page letter, written in ink. Real ink. The kind of thing no one uses anymore. It was from Harold's wife. She'd passed away a few years ago, long before I ever started this tribute. But she'd written this for me. For a time after her death. The words made my eyes burn. Dear Ethan, I know you're the reason Harold still sketches at night. You probably don't even realize it, but he was drifting before you showed up. You brought something back into his life. You gave him permission to dream again. And for that, I'll always be grateful. He set aside a private grant for you last year. He didn't want to make a fuss. But it's real. A travel and research fund to study whatever you want, wherever you want. He wanted you to be free. Use it. Build something beautiful. Love. Elise Vexler. I read it twice. Then again. Dean sat across from me, waiting. She never gave this to me. I said. How did Miranda get it? He shrugged. You tell me. It felt like my brain was on fire. Harold had created a grant. For me. A legacy fund. And somehow, Miranda had intercepted it. Buried it. Along with the letter. Along with any trace of what Harold actually meant to me. Dean placed a small folder on the table. Financial records. Email drafts. Paper trails showing the grant existed. She used firm partners to smother it. Reallocated the funds under Project R&D. It's all here. I swallowed hard. Why are you showing me this now? Dean looked down. Because I believed her. I let her frame you. I watched you get cut out of something you built and said nothing. There was a beat of silence between us. Then he added, you don't deserve what's coming, Ethan. And I'm not going to be part of it anymore. I looked at the folder, then the letter, then back at Dean. For the first time in weeks, I felt clarity. Everything that had been stolen from me, respect, credit, legacy, trust, it was all right here. In this letter, in this file. But I wasn't going to ask for it back. I was going to take it. And I was going to make damn sure everyone watched me do it. I spent the rest of that day at home, seated on the floor with the folder spread around me. Emails, fund transfer logs, account renaming requests. Everything Dean had uncovered was there. Cold, meticulous evidence that Miranda hadn't just sidelined me professionally. She'd stolen from me. More than money. She stole time, direction, legacy. Harold's grant, buried under layers of corporate sleight of hand, was meant to give me freedom. Not the fake kind Miranda peddled in those performance reviews, but real, clean sky freedom to do the work Harold had believed in. Independent study, global research, design without politics. In Miranda, she rerouted it into something called Partner Innovation Pool. She'd buried it in firm overhead, diluted the purpose, then pretended it never existed. I could feel my fingers shaking as I pieced together the timeline. The grant was approved 9 months ago. I remembered that period, long nights, double projects, vague promises from Miranda that a growth opportunity was on the horizon. Meanwhile, she was siphoning the funds behind closed doors. And Harold? He never mentioned it. Not once. Maybe he forgot. Maybe he trusted Miranda to pass it along. Maybe he didn't know how far she'd gone. But Elise had known. Her letter still sat beside me, creased now, tear-stained in one corner. A sentence kept repeating in my head. You gave him permission to dream again. I needed to see Harold. Not with rage. Not with accusation. But with proof. With truth. I called Dean that night and told him everything I planned to bring. The sealed letter, the grant records, the performance review drafts. All of it. I wanted no surprises. Dean cleared his throat. I'll come with you. You don't have to. No, he said. I do. We scheduled a meeting through the firm partner, Edward Lee, one of the few senior execs not fully under Miranda's thumb. Edward respected Harold. He'd studied under him back in the late 90s. When Dean mentioned this involved financial discrepancies and internal ethics, Edward didn't hesitate. Tomorrow morning, he said. My office. Bring everything. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept flipping through Elise's letter like it would change, like maybe it would offer some instruction, some magic phrase that would make Harold say, I had no idea. I'm sorry, but letters don't change. People do. The next morning, I wore a charcoal suit. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I needed to feel clean, armored, prepared, like the version of myself Harold had once written notes to in red ink. Dean and I met on the firm's 20th floor. The air was stiff, the kind of stiff that says, something's going down today. Edward greeted us without small talk. Harold's in the conference room, he said. Miranda's on her way. I nodded. Dean adjusted his collar, then followed me in. Harold stood when we entered. He looked older than he had the last time we spoke. The lines on his face deeper. His hands folded in front of him like he wasn't sure whether to brace or bless. Ethan, he said, I heard you asked for this meeting. Miranda walked in just then, holding her coffee like a prop, dressed in corporate white and steel gray lipstick. I assume this is about the tribute, she said. I really wish you'd spoken to me privately. I placed Elise's letter on the table. This isn't about the tribute, I said. It's about everything you buried. Harold's brow furrowed. Miranda's face didn't change, but her fingers curled slightly tighter around the coffee cup. I laid out the documents. One by one. The approval email from Harold regarding the grant. The internal transfer forms renaming it. The expense trails. The sponsorship deals that diverted attention from the original plan. The locked drawer where the letter was hidden. Dean spoke too. Not a speech, just one sentence. I watched her do it. I helped her without knowing. But now I know. Silence. Edward flipped through the documents slowly. When he reached the letter from Elise, he read it aloud. The room was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning click. By the time he finished, Harold was pale. He reached out, gently picked up the letter like it might crumble. I gave this to Miranda to deliver, he said softly. She never did. I replied. He turned to her. Miranda? That was when she tried to spin. Harold, I was protecting Ethan. He wasn't ready for that kind of grant. I was going to roll it into something more sustainable, something the firm could help manage. I laughed once, quiet, bitter. You weren't managing anything. You were controlling it. She straightened her spine. This is a gross overreaction. Ethan's been emotionally unstable for months. I've documented everything. Dean can back me up. Dean spoke again. Actually, I've read those documents. And I've submitted a correction report. They're fabricated. I was there. Miranda's mask cracked for the first time. She turned to Edward, desperate now. Are we really going to do this? Over a letter, Edward stood slowly. We're doing this because you tried to erase someone else's legacy. And then you tried to bury your mistake with lies. He turned to Harold. Do you want to speak? Harold looked at me. Really looked at me. Then at Elise's handwriting. Then back at Miranda. And finally, he spoke. I'm done. He reached into his coat, pulled out a worn leather notebook, and placed it on the table. My journals, he said. Early works. I'd like Ethan to publish them. Under his name. With full rights. Miranda stiffened. You're retiring? He nodded. Effective immediately. Edward turned to her. Miranda, you're suspended pending internal investigation. We'll be in touch. She didn't scream. She didn't argue. She just picked up her coffee, turned, and left. The door clicked shut behind her, and the silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was relief. Harold looked at me once more. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I nodded. I'm sorry I waited this long. But we both knew there was no more room for regret. Only rebuilding. And this time, we'd do it on our own terms. The firm's conference room had always felt impersonal. Glass walls, sterile carpet, a table so polished it reflected your flaws back at you. But that morning, something felt different. Real. Like the weight in the air had finally shifted. I sat at the head of the table, not out of ego, but because Edward asked me to. Across from me sat Harold, calm but pale. Miranda took the chair closest to the window, like she needed the view of downtown Chicago to remind herself of the world she thought she still owned. Dean stood near the whiteboard. He wasn't a passive bystander anymore. Edward entered last, closing the door behind him with a quiet click. Let's begin, he said. No one moved. I opened the folder in front of me. This isn't just about a mismanaged tribute. This is about manipulation, fraud, suppression of a private grant, and a campaign to discredit me when I wouldn't go along. Miranda crossed her arms. This is absurd. I didn't flinch. Then explain why you intercepted a sealed letter from Harold's wife. Why you buried a grant he created. Why you fabricated performance reviews about me and stored them in a locked drawer. She opened her mouth, then shut it. Dean stepped forward. I saw the reviews. I helped compile the tribute file. I saw the document renaming Ethan's fund into a shared innovation pool. And I saw the VR presentation deal, how she prioritized sponsor visibility over Harold's wishes. Edward turned to Miranda. Is this true? Her voice was tight. We had to shift focus. The original plan was sentimental, not scalable. I made decisions for the good of the firm. Harold looked up slowly. You didn't just shift focus. You rewrote the entire narrative. You erased Ethan. You erased me. For the first time, Miranda looked genuinely unsettled. I trusted you, he continued, his voice lower now. I handed you my life's work. My legacy. You turned it into a marketing reel. Silence. Edward flipped a page in his notes. Miranda, based on the evidence presented and witness statements, you are hereby suspended pending a full investigation into your conduct, including financial misappropriation and ethical violations. Miranda stood. I built this firm. Edward didn't blink. Then you know how much damage this could have cost. Her eyes flicked to me, then to Dean. She wanted someone, anyone, to stand beside her. No one did. She walked out without another word. The door closed behind her. Edward sat down again. Harold, we'll manage the internal review separately. For now, you've made your position clear. Harold nodded. I'm stepping down. Effective immediately. I've served long enough. I watched him, waiting to feel vindicated. But what I felt was something else. Exhaustion. He turned to me, slowly, and pulled a flash drive from his jacket pocket. My early journals. Lecture notes. Unpublished essays. They're yours now. Publish them. Finish what I never did. I took the drive, fingers trembling slightly. This won't fix what she did, I said. No, he replied. But it'll fix what I didn't. Dean walked over, placing a hand on my shoulder. You okay? I nodded. Not because I was, but because I would be. That afternoon, I walked through the office one last time. Past the glass walls. Past the lobby where the Tribute 65 poster had already been taken down. I didn't pack my desk. I didn't say goodbye. I just left. Because something had ended in that room. Not just Miranda's grip. Not just Harold's mentorship. But the version of me that thought legacy came from approval. It didn't. It came from truth. And this time, it was mine. I didn't go back to the firm the next day. Or the day after that. There was nothing left for me in that building. Not a desk. Not a role. Not even closure. I'd already had that, in a glass room, across from the man who once believed in me and the woman who tried to erase me. I submitted my resignation by email. Short, clean, unambiguous. Subject, formal notice. Body, I will not be returning to the firm. Please consider this my official resignation. Thank you for the lessons, Ethan. There was no reply. I didn't expect one. Instead, I booked a flight. Not to Vienna. That dream was already packed away, faded around the edges. No, I chose Kyoto. Wabi-sabi architecture. Impermanence. Imperfection. Silence. It felt right. Not as a detour, but as a beginning. A place where I could breathe again. Build again. Not for clients. Not for press. For myself. I booked a quiet 2-month stay in a traditional machiya house on the edge of the city. It had no TV, no office chair, no branding. Just sliding doors, aged wood, and a courtyard garden with a maple tree that turned gold in autumn. Before I left, I had one final thing to do. Harold's journals. I digitized every page, his lectures, sketches, commentary scribbled in the margins. The raw stuff. The unfinished thoughts. The kind of work that would be ignored in a VR slideshow but would mean the world to the students coming after us. I contacted his old university, told them I had a collection I wanted to donate. They asked if I wanted my name on it. I told them no. Let it be what it was, Harold's voice, preserved. The morning I left for the airport, Dean met me for coffee. He looked different, less performative, more grounded, like someone finally breathing with both lungs. I owe you, he said. No, I replied. You did the right thing. That's enough. He nodded. Then quietly, I'm trying to figure out who I am without her voice in my head. Good, I said. Start there. He held up a USB stick. I've been working on my own designs. Stuff I buried for years. I smiled. Send them when you're ready. We didn't hug. We didn't need to. When I got to the airport, I stood outside for a while. No phone in my hand. No itinerary in my pocket. Just stillness. I watched people rush in and out, families, business travelers, couples arguing over terminals. I stood there, breathing the early morning air, cool and sharp, and thought about everything I'd lost. My fund. My mentor. My job. But also what I'd found. My voice. My freedom. And somewhere, in a folder with Elise's handwriting, something that felt like permission. I boarded the plane without looking back. And as it climbed, I let the skyline fall behind me. Not because I was running, but because, for the first time, I was flying towards something entirely my own.